sitting with us. I will not go into details as to how they did it, but we don't believe, for instance, in our names, we don't believe in our practices, we don't believe that we can come up with good policies ourselves, and as a result, we go and borrow policies. The blueprint of the 1996 white paper and the revised is borrowed. It is not ours. But I don't want to sound very negative throughout. I want to acknowledge that that blueprint is important in that all government structures at local level, provincial level, and national level, some represented here by colleagues who have introduced, who have organized this event, they need that blueprint in order for them to allocate resources. So when the chair of Ccifsa, the original chair of Ccifsa, talked about how it is important for us to be part of the conversations about policies, I completely agree with him. Because if we are not part of the policy processes, particularly interpreting together with government officials, they will interpret it the way they want and allocate resources the way they want. So we need to be part of the processes of interpreting and implementing the policy. Again, I will come back to how we interpret. But without a policy, we may not have the resources allocated to us. So the first positive thing that I want to highlight is that policies are very important because people who sit in high offices use that blueprint to say, okay, we are going to add another theater to Ekurhuleni. But which policy guideline is here to lead us? We are going to build 10 more community arts centers. Before they do so, they will say, what policy line are we working with? So for that reason, policies are important. Let me quickly jump to talk about how the misinterpretations happen. If you look at that document, especially the national, the white paper, it's a short document, this time longer than the 1996 white paper, but it's so short for it to be comprehensive to guide every step we take as artists. So that's one thing which we need to understand, take out of this session today, that it is only a guideline. It is a guideline which is taken by officials, government officials like Pasca here, who will then look and say, how does the national policy impact the provincial policy? And how does it impact the local policy? And how do I move as Pasca do it to make sure that the city of Ekurhuleni is provided with in terms of arts, culture, and heritage? And he will make his interpretation. And this is where the misinterpretation happens. If Pasca do it, I'm sorry Pasca, I'm going to constantly refer to you, reads it wrongly, then we are all doomed. But perhaps not completely doomed. Because what Pasca is going to do is when he reads the document, the physical black and white, he is going to recommend allocation of resources. And a new community arts center is going to be built. And this is where I'm talking about how cultural policy impacts us. So Pasca read, understood it the way he understood it, built 5 new community arts centers. You are not going to watch and ignore the 5 new community arts centers, but you are going to react to that. So the process of cultural policy implementation is a whole process of action and reaction. Never mind reading the paper. It's important for us to have the paper. And it's important, perhaps we should talk about simplifying the paper. But the paper may stay in Pasca's office. It's read, a center is built, we react. When we react, we are influencing policy. And half the time, I can give many examples of how we react. We may react by accepting the 5 community art centers. We may react by rejecting and going to perform on the streets. When we perform on the streets or when we perform in our garages, it's a policy statement. I am proposing that we find a new way of reading policies, so that when we do analysis of policies, we are not sitting to say, page 5, what does it say? What has happened? No, I am proposing a way of looking at the activities which are happening on the ground and interpret them and understand their meanings. When you understand the meaning, it doesn't end there. It will trigger a reaction from the authorities. You understand the meaning, you act on it, triggers a reaction, and therefore the policy implementation process is a continuous cyclic action and reaction process. If we count ourselves and wait for Pascal Dube to do everything, he will do what he can and what he understands from his interpretation, perhaps from his classes with Chati at Wits University. If we don't react to that, then we are relinquishing, we are giving away our agency in making the sector that we want. The point which I'm making is that it is the responsibilities of all of us, no matter how small you may be in the sector. The other time we were talking about, I was using the metaphor of the ecosystem. And the ecosystem is made up of the big 5. The elephants, the rhinos, and the big 5. And normally, our policies tend to give prominence to the big 5 and ignore the mosquitoes and bacteria in the ecosystem. But if you take away the bacteria and the mosquitoes, the elephant may not survive. What am I saying? Every other organism in the ecosystem is very important. What we just need to do is to think about, what is my role as the bacteria in the ecosystem? And know that if you remove yourself from the ecosystem, then the giant will fall. If you know that, then we are beginning to make sense of our own sector. Every you have to remind me when to stop. The next point which I want to talk about as we share ideas is that 42-page document which we call the national policy is deliberately made ambiguous. What do I mean? It's deliberately made vague. Vagueness in policies is not a mistake. Mm-hmm. It is a deliberate thing which leaves space for interpretation. For real. So that when we interpret, we can, even government itself is worried about trapping itself in the policy. So when the policy is crafted, it's crafted with the room to then maneuver and bring other resources, for example, but it's made vague for many reasons. So we come back to the interpretation. The interpretation becomes important, Pascal. And let's allow everyone to react to our interpretations. And of course, along the way, part of the process includes consultations which happen. So I want to share one definition of cultural policies. There are many. many scholars define cultural policies differently. And the many different definitions of cultural policies point to the idea of the vagueness and deliberate vagueness. This gentleman called Gray said, cultural policy can simply be seen as a range of activities that governments undertake or do not undertake. Whoever thought that the inaction of government is not policy, it is policy. So the inaction of government or the lack of action is policy which we need to interpret and understand its meaning. So for instance, if the government decides to withhold money, perhaps the straight explanation is that we don't have the budget. But sometimes we need to dig deeper and understand and ask ourselves, is this not deliberate? So the inaction or the lack of action is action. Because when they don't put money, what are the consequences? The action of not putting money has dire consequences on the sector. So I really was fascinated by this definition of what cultural policies are. But as I'm wrapping up, I want to say that there are certain insights which we get in understanding our own actions and understanding other people's actions. Some of the things we get from books. Books help us to understand, sometimes even our own behaviors. We don't understand how we have become oppressors. Scholars like Frantz Fanon, who is quoted by many as one of the post-colonialist theorists. Frantz Fanon was a psychologist, and he concluded that after many observations, clinical observations with many patients and in psychiatric spaces, concluded that the colonized sits with two sides, two identities. The identity of the colonizer and the identity of the colonized. So we have a duality in our head which we cannot run away from. And do we pause to ask ourselves what that duality does? When the oppressor in us surfaces, what does it do to our work? When the liberated in us surfaces, what does it do to our work? So what we need to be mindful about, because oppression is not good, we need to be conscious every moment when you see the oppressor in you surfacing, because that oppressor in you will tell you not to do the right action, the right reaction to the policy. And when the oppressor in you tells you not to do the right action, then the next thing is you are blaming someone else. But all it's happening in here. I prepared quite a lot, but I know Tsebile is asking me to wrap up, and I will wrap up by coming back to the point which I said earlier on about the solutions. It's not important to just paint the negatives. The solution is found in, number one, taking the agency and empowering ourselves. And some of you are sitting and saying, this professor is now talking theory. What does it mean to take the agency? And taking agency is deciding, for instance, to hell with funding. And if you tell yourself and convince yourself to hell with government funding, you are telling yourself. And you will begin to see that you have enough resources to get started. One last point. We have been misled to think that facilities like this one are the ultimate. No, it is not. Pascal will tell you how he struggles to make full use of this facility, to fill up this facility. And it's not a mistake that it's not being filled, but because policies suggest inappropriate infrastructure, policies suggest inappropriate formalization, policies suggest inappropriate professionalization. I'm not saying no to professionalization. I'm not saying no to formalization. I'm not saying no to institutionalization. I am saying it has to be appropriate. Pascal, I'm not suggesting that we destroy this building, but part of me will say, let's burn it down and build multiple centers which will take care of our people. I thank you.